Hey guys, Tarke here, and I wanted to sort of cover my thoughts when it comes to the Ascendancy changes that were proposed in Prophecy. Now, I held out on making this video quite late. I didn't want to give my thoughts before I knew the patch notes, and I've also been quite ill recently, so the time of the two meant I did wait a while. However, thinking about it, I want to get my initial thoughts up before we get the final patch notes for 2.3, so I can sort of do a before and after, because it's always interesting to give some speculation before we know exactly where GGG is coming from. So expect another video similar to this in the next couple of days, just before Prophecy, when we get the final patch notes. Basically, I want to cover the kinds of builds that I'm thinking of running to start off the next league, and sort of my reaction, shall we say, to some of the proposed changes. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to say thank you, Cat, for ripping my green screen. I want to say that I wasn't actually that surprised by the buff to Ascendancy. What initially caught me off guard was the 2 additional skill points. People who watched my stream when it was first revealed, and in case you don't already know, previously we only had the option of 6 points. So you'd go like, okay, we're going to be Gladiator, we might go for this and this. Champion, obviously. Maybe you go for that if you're, doing party play, whatever. We're now going to be getting 8 in Prophecy, which will be unlocking through a final tier of Labyrinth that you'll unlock through mapping. Now that surprised the hell out of me. What didn't really surprise me too much was the systematic updating of all the Ascendancies. I was expecting there to be some revision, as, a lot of the Ascendancies, or at least a good majority of them, had underperforming nodes, and some of them felt very subpar. However, the level to which everything has been improved is somewhat odd. So, for example, let's use Elementalists as an example, since I played a lot of Elementalists, as did most people last league. So, you look at Legion of the Primordial, we've slapped on an additional +1 maximum golems, which is a pretty big power play. It's actually a change I think is kind of cool, because it really plays into the fantasy of being this master elemental golem guy. You get more golems. Seems cool. Clay Shaper seems quite underwhelming to everyone who's tried playing around with it. So, it kind of incorporates some of that idea into just Elementalist baseline, and it makes that build even more interesting. So that's pretty 10 out of 10. Then, you go Shaper, haven't changed that, obviously it's really OP. Beacon of Ruin has had its radius buffed, which is quite surprising. So is the Elite Proglyph support gem itself. Paragon of Calamity is 50% reduced reflected elemental damage taken. Slayer has the corresponding for fizz damage taken. Now, both of these nodes are sort of troublesome, in my personal opinion. The reason why I'm not a massive fan of them is, while it's a really amazing effect, and I'm a big advocate of Sibyl's Lament, which is a unique ring which gives you this, effect, depending on which ring slot you have it, at 30%. While I'm a big fan of the actual stat, reduced reflect damage, I like having the option of more ways to handle reflect. I don't like them being tied to Ascendancy. The reason why I don't like them being tied to Ascendancy is it just makes the build options more narrow for the builds which really worry about reflect. So if you're playing a very high elemental build, let's say Oro's Flicker, any crit elemental based attack build, basically any elemental build which isn't doing chaos conversion, which is quite a few builds these days thanks to the chaos node, you have to kind of think a bit about reflect, and you need to think about reflect maps, and then we just whack this on Elementalist. It's kind of annoying. Personally, I would rather a rework of the pure reflect mechanic. Personally, I've never been a big fan of reflect and thorn-like mechanics in ARPGs. I know some people love them. I can understand why GGG wants in the game, but personally, I've always just found them a really frustrating mechanic, as it's either something you completely ignore if your build can ignore it, or it's something which cripples your build. And you design your character so it can't one-shot itself to single reflect mob, then you randomly off-screen yourself to double reflect, which will happen to my Mjolnir character. It's horrendous. It's an old, thing of Path X with the old off-screen reflect. While it's much less common, there's The fact that they've made both this node and the other node for Slayer implies that GGG thinks that Reflect is potentially too strong, so players need this option. So I would rather this be on something which was somewhat more universal, so it was accessible to all subclasses, or it was just baked into the core Reflect mechanic, because let's say I want to play an Inquisitor, I want to worry about Reflect, well, I don't have the nice option of this. Meaning, you know, am I trading off damage to go Elementalist? Well, not really, because you're getting the whole Prolift shenanigans. You can kind of get my point. Some Ascendancies haven't been changed at all. So Occultist is a good example of that. Saboteur, as far as I'm aware, hasn't received any significant changes, and if they have, you know, minor ones. As far as I'm aware, the whole blind thing hasn't been touched, which is somewhat interesting to me. I know that some people kind of like this 2-pointer with the chance to make soak crowds on hit. This 4-pointer though, it's just, I don't know, I feel like they could do more interesting things with these two nodes. I've never been a massive fan of the trap and mind specialization, but I'm sure someone does. Weave the Arcane is an odd node to focus on considering some of the other upcoming nodes. But this again is one which I find really interesting. So before Ascendancy went live, it was a 10% chance to recover, I believe, 5% of max mana. Then they changed it to a 5% chance to get 10%. My first build of Horrendous was a mind over matter, hybrid life evasion, hybrid life energy shield, high evasion trickster, and it was actually a really tanky character, and it used with the Arcane as Incinerate is like this cool like health sustain mechanic, and it was kind of frustrating having such a low chance. Now obviously them buffing it to 20% is great for that particular build and will hopefully promote more interesting mind over matter evasion builds, but I find it strange that your initial core design was a 10% proc with 5%. I might be slightly wrong on the mana recovery, but it was originally a 10% proc, to then get down to a 5%, to then jump up to a 20%. It just seems like each example seems really extreme, so it's kind of, I don't know, a bit weird. It's definitely a huge improvement, and I welcome the change. I just find it kind of odd that it went live in such a low state if this is how you make it good. Does that make sense? Like, if it's only good with a 20% proc rate, I just don't understand how it could have gone live with only a 5%. It seems like maybe it was just rushed or whatever, but okay. More damage, more interesting things. Attack projectiles return to you after hitting targets. Apparently this works or doesn't work with Pierce, so it's not always like you're doubling your damage. It only doubles the damage or returns the projectile in some cases. As far as I'm aware, if you pierce through a mob, the projectile won't then deal damage again on the way back. So it's kind of, if you're like a chain build, then you can chain and it comes back. I need to look up the mechanics on it further, but very interesting node. We'll definitely see some use or potential. Other than that, you know, I believe there's been a few little tweaks here and there, but nothing that major. But this is very, very nice. And Rupture did get a buff. And I do like how it has the moving or bleeding doesn't cause you to take extra damage. And much the same as the reduced elemental thing, it's something that I appreciate and it's something that I kind of like, but at the same time I find it kind of frustrating. As bleed is a mechanic which you can currently only counter now through certain ascendancy options, which have opened up to other classes and through flasks. I would love to see this kind of effect on a unique. If you had this kind of effect on like a subpar unique ring, amulet, boots, just as a nice bit of flavor, it'd be one of those things if you could take a slightly suboptimal armor choice for that, you know, brain fart protection. Sometimes, especially I know in this case a lot, when you've been playing for a long time, been streaming for a long time, you just, you know, mental lapse, you go, oh, my character's dead. I kind of like having that sort of thing on something more accessible to more people rather than just, well, shove it on Deadeye on a node which not many people are going to take, but maybe more people take Rupture now, so I guess it's okay. Coming down to Pathfinder, Pathfinder's good. Pathfinder is really, really good. Master Alchemist is really good. I actually ran Master Alchemist a little bit. I run it on 2 or 3 builds in Perendus, obviously pre the buff, and it's good. If you're doing a non-crit build and you don't need Master Surgeon, but you want Vessel up all the time, it makes your flask rolling very, very flexible. You don't need to worry about having, you know, grounding, freezing, all of that stuff, because your flask just naturally removes status elements. So they've whopped on this 20% chance to free shock and ignite, which is interesting. They have buffed the Prolific Support Gem's radius. I still don't think we're going to be seeing many or any Prolific builds outside of Elementalist, but if we do, there is potential for it in Pathfinder. I'm actually very tempted to start the league with the new claw that's being added. It's basically the Frostblade's claw. It gives you additional chain. And it has this interesting / weird mechanic where your critical hits with cold damage won't always freeze. They're based off your freeze % chance. Before, if you crit, you get a guaranteed status element. And so that kind of a claw build promotes freeze % stacking. And, well, you do crit claws and you go boom, boom, and you pick up a bunch of LE damage, you pick up a bunch of chance to freeze, shock and ignite, which you'll have some other elements, so you'll be shocking and freezing more reliably. You'll get, you know, some nice flask effect. Flask effect is always really, really good. You get Master Surgeon, you get attack speed, you get Nature's Boon. Just seems really solid. My other, like, big contender for what am I going to start the league with is Raider. Raider previously was very cool. I always thought the whole phasing Avatar of the Bell thing was very cool. Just a little bit underwhelming, a little bit hard to sustain. You have to choose between phasing or onslaught, but you nearly always just wanted to go frenzy, and then it's like, okay, well, which 2.0 I want? With having 8 points, you suddenly get the option to say, take the frenzy wheel, get both phasing and onslaught, you know, procs constantly, or going for a 4-pointer, another 4-pointer. And Quartz got really, really good. So, 6% chance to dodge attacks, strong. 2% chance to gain phasing, 3 seconds and kill, pretty good. You have phasing while at maximum frenzy charges. Any build which uses frenzy charges semi-reliably, especially as a raider, will always have frenzy charges. You have phasing while you have onslaught. This is huge. The reason why this is so huge is even if you decide to go 4-pointer, 4-pointer and not have a reliable onslaught proc, you can run a onslaught flask or a silver flask, and it will also be a phasing flask. So you get one flask gives you your onslaught and it gives you your phasing, or you can just rely on the frenzy charge setup. It's really good, really, really good. Like, it's solid. So I'm gonna be, you know, coming up with some perma phasing again. I want to do something with Frostblades. I like Frostblades. So I'm either gonna be doing it as a raider, Pathfinder, or jumping over to Inquisitor for my first character, more than likely. But there's always that little thing of when the patch notes come out and we finally know what's going on. If there's something really cool in there, which I come up with last minute, I might push this build to my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, but expect me to be playing Frostblades at some point in the league. Since I have jumped over to Inquisitor, I will quickly cover the improvements we have here. So Instruments of Virtue is just a slightly better buff. We've increased the numbers on it. Not that interesting. This is unchanged as far as I remember. This just got buffed, just more effective. And then we have this section. This section I find really interesting. So I'd originally said a few times on my stream, because people were always telling me, oh, come up with a build using the Consecrated Ground section, or the Consecrated Ground section is terrible. Well, it's actually really solid for CI builds, because you have that immune to status element while on Consecrated Ground. You also get 4% of maximum mana and energy shield regenerated per second while on Consecrated Ground now, and you get the 25% attack and cast speed while on Consecrated Ground. So you proc Consecrated Ground through Sanctify, which gives you the chance to create when you hit, and the chance to create on kill. And it gives you 40% increased damage to your allies. So whenever you're hit, or whenever you kill something, you're more than likely going to drop something. So you drop this Consecrated Ground, which gives you a status element immunity, and it gives you a massive chunk of energy shield recharge, and it gives you either an attack or a card speed buff. So Pious Path is useful for nearly every single CI build. Maybe, you know, Discharge doesn't need the cast speed or the attack speed, self-cast that is. But nearly every build will come up with some kind of use for this. I think there will definitely be some CI builds making good use of this alongside Inevitable Judgment. I think this is a very, very interesting combination, and I look forward to playing with it somewhat myself. Now, as for the other immediate WTF buffs, we have not changed. This is pretty good. You have the increased attack per 100 actually. Increased attack speed per 100 actually is powerful. It's not crazy OP. It's interesting. It makes gear choices interesting. It makes crit builds even better as a Juggernaut, because you can keep stacking flat accuracy on your rare slots just to really keep that accuracy high, and it's giving you attack speed. You'll come with some very interesting helmets, which, you know, have like loads of attack to them because of just how much accuracy you can get on certain slots. That's unchanged. This is improved. Fortify, which is always so nice. Unchanged. Unrelenting, aka everyone's role playing as crit and playing self-cast burning discharge. If you would gain endurance charges, you instead gain up to your maximum number of endurance charges. So, and it has been confirmed, what this means is if you ever generate an endurance charge and you have this selected, you will get max endurance charges. This is obviously really, really good for discharge, because Enduring Cry against the boss, you have max charges, you blow up the boss. The issue that most discharge builds have is they have amazing map clear, and then they slow down on bosses because they can't regularly generate enough charges to spam discharge kill the boss. You can use a Dodri's Elixir Flask to get your charges that way. You can use Warlord's Mark, you can use Enduring Cry, you can use Endurance Charge on melee stun, you can use some unique items like Duresto's Defiance. Comb's Sign is getting a buff in Prophecy because we're going to have like a fated version. We'll have an improved Comb's Sign, which will give you some kind of additional life regen based on your endurance charge. We don't have the final number yet, but basically, Unrelenting, if you're not thinking about it, think about it. It's going to be good. I had played a bit of self-cast discharge in Horrendous using Conviction of Power. And just with this sort of like semi-wonky generate power charges, convert it to endurance charge, it's like a mini Vol's Devotion. It worked really smooth through leveling, so having a much more consistent version, yeah. Self-cast discharge will be a thing, and it will be really, really tanky. My Explosive Arrow Juggernaut, which I started the Flashback 2 week with, was an amazing character. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I sacrificed a lot of damage to get the tankiness, and the tankiness of Juggernaut is worth it. I've been saying for a long time that Juggernaut, in my opinion, is superior purely defensively when it comes to comparing UR Fortify. I much prefer Juggernaut. Self-crafting chests is really straightforward. I crafted 3 or 4 amazing Juggernaut chests in the first few days of the 2 week. Definitely something to watch. Another thing while we're talking about Marauder is Aspect of Carnage, Cloaked in Savagery. Now, when I first heard about the 8 points rather than 6, it makes so much sense, because it's a lot of the Ascendancies had these weird choices where, obviously with Marauder, the synergy of these two nodes is so unbelievably real. So just a quick reminder, if you don't know, Cloaked in Savagery, 100% of damage leeches life if you've taken a savage hit recently, 50% increased damage if you've taken a savage hit recently, 25% increased attack speed if you've taken a savage hit recently. A hit that removes at least 15% of your maximum life is counted as savage hit. Previously it was 20%. So if you take a hit which hits you for 50% of your maximum life in the last 4 seconds, you get this amazing buff. And you have Aspect of Carnage, which is you deal 40% more, very important, more damage, and you have increased damage taken. Really good synergy, it makes a lot of sense. You know, it's clear that some of these Ascendancies have been designed very well and very single-mindedly around, you know, certain interactions, which is why I completely believed GGG when they said that they originally planned to launch with 8. This is perfect evidence that, yeah, this was always what they were planning to do. Now, another kind of interesting things they've done in here is Warbringer. Funnily enough, when I was making my self-cast Discharge last week, I'd thought about doing Berserker, just because of the increased enduring cry interactions, being able to endure cry more regularly. Well, this is now gain 25% of your max life and mana when you use war cry, increased duration, also increased war cry cooldown recovery. I'll struggle to find a build where you don't just want to take these two straight away, but you know, having an on-demand 25% heal outside of Flask is really nice, especially for cases where, you know, Zana missions, some boss fights, you know, Pale Council, Zeri, anything where you have something you have to kill, you have a limited portal usage. Most good builds won't struggle with that and then won't be reliant on a sort of clutch mechanic. But for someone, the self-sustain this offers of not being reliant on Flask, being able to save those fast charges, being able to regularly heal themselves up if they just duck out of combat, wait a few seconds, is really, really powerful. But again, it is kind of competing with some pretty good synergy. Also, it's worth noting that Pain Reaver got a crazy buff. Before it was just percent life and mana if you've killed it recently. It now just has a base life and mana percent in there, which is huge. This is so unbelievably insane. It is just really, really good. Really, really good. It's so good. Chieftain is still kind of uninteresting in my opinion. It did get 1% of damage up, but your totems has leached its life, which is huge, and if it was on any other Ascendancy, I would be saying this is OP. The problem with Chieftain is so heavily themed in fire damage. Chance to ignite, fire damage, life regen, fizz fire damage. You know, there's so much theming that you're instantly narrowed down into, okay, totem build, then a fire totem build. It just takes away from a lot of the builds which could make quite interesting use out of this. Also, with fire to chaos receiving quite heavy nerfs from the whole conversion rates, it's not even a case of, okay, well, I'm going to do a cold to fire to chaos. You could still do a cold to fire chieftain, which would work quite well. You want to avatar of fire, you can use a Pipestone ring, but I would prefer if this effect was on, let's say, a Hiero, and there'd be more universal usage of such a powerful effect. It's alright though, it's still good. There will be some builds which make good use of it, but it irks me a little bit. Now, Chieftain received some nerfs. You know, we've decided that we've slightly stripped these numbers down a little bit. They still are Fortify. We've taken 2% move speed off. I mean, is anyone gonna reroll? Oh no, I've lost 2% move speed. Yes, a lot of the other Ascendancies are much better now, so there's more, you know, genuine decisions. You don't want to pick X or Y. But I don't really see the point of a 2% move speed nerf. Like, it's such an inconsequential, tiny, mind-altering change. The taunt wheel actually got hit quite hard. I remember Project a few times in my stream mentioning that it was possible to, like, perma stun lock with the taunt wheel. It's just, why would you ever spend the points in it? Because if you got the taunt wheel, you couldn't get your Fortify. Now it's a increased chance of taunt on hit, reduced damage taken if you've taunted recently, life regen if you've taunted recently, which is, you know, pretty decent. Evasion, taunt duration, and now enemies you taunt take increased damage, deal less damage. Still a pretty good effect, still pretty solid. We'll definitely see some use in group play, but you can't perma stun anymore. Feels sad, man. Gladiator got a lot of improvements. The additional points made some classes much stronger. So, for example, we talked about Berserker earlier. Gladiator does really well with additional skill points. So most builds would make use of Gratuitous Violence, and then you had to choose, okay, so if I've got Gratuitous Violence, I'm probably going to take Blood in the Eyes, in which case I then can't get Versatile Combatant, so I'm probably going to do something kind of like this. I'm going to go do something kind of like this, but then I lose out on Blood in the Eyes. With them slapping an additional 25% chance to cause beyond hit with Blood in the Eyes, you're no longer that reliant on weapons with guaranteed bleeds. A lot of people in my chat were telling me about builds that are running just using the 25% chance. They weren't using it Zeus's Favors, they weren't using Jack the Axis, and they were completely fine. having 50% chance to cause bleeding on hit with attacks is more than enough to make really solid builds with much wider diversity when it comes to weapon choices. I'm also surprised that we aren't seeing more bow builds, because you can, you know, get block with the rear guard. So you could do some max block, spell block, bow builds, possibly, you know, crit puncture if you wanted to. I know that crit puncture assassin's looking pretty tasty, but anyway. Basically, Gladiator looks really solid. Really solid. And I'm definitely looking forward to fighting games. Put my hands in Gratuitous Violence build. It's also worth noting that Outmatch and Outlast got some pretty significant buffs. It still has the Frenzy and Endurance Charge generation mechanic, but you also get 10% more Fizz while at maximum Frenzy charges, 10% reduced Fizz damage taken while at maximum Endurance charges. That's pretty substantial. That's a pretty good buff. Violent Retaliation, again, pretty solid, very easy to stack up to silly amounts, really good to match with Flames, incidentally. Very good. Now we have the Chosen One. Now, Slayer was something of a meme throughout Prince. I actually played 2, I want to say, Slayer builds, and it was pretty good for what I was doing. So as you all know, I played a lot of Aura's Flicker. I played it as a champion, I played it as a Slayer, I played it as an Inquisitor, I played it as an Elementals. It was interesting. Now, thanks to Overwhelm and the incredibly high damage and clear speed of Flicker builds, I basically had Karma stun lock in the fact that I would stun for the time it took me to kill things. So I would just flicker through the map, everything would get stunned, everything would die before it got unstunned. Overwhelm is a really good mechanic. It was actually like decent, you know, before the crazy buffs. With all the buffs that Slayer's gotten, yeah, GG. So first off, Impact is no longer tied into being a 4-pointer, you can just get it for 2. And this is the Splash, and it has the increased radius area skills in there. It's just good, right? You can just go boom, 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 if you want to. So basically this is really good now. This is still solid. This is... So, gain onslaught for 20 seconds, which is a very long time for even the slowest of builds. 20 seconds is a really long time. This is a really easy to maintain buff. This will always be active. Kill enemies that have 20% or lower life when hit. It is being clarified, this isn't when they hit you, this is just a 20% culling strike. Culling strike is already pretty good. Having a 20% culling strike is really good. So you basically gain a universal 7th link, which is a superior version of culling strike. You will nearly always take this. It gives you onslaught. You don't need to having a silver flask. This is just like you take this in basically 95% of all Slayer builds. We then have Headsman, which is previously mentioned, reduced Fizz Reflect. Now this isn't actually as helpful as it seems. A lot of the physical builds are quite heavy in elemental conversion, even if just rocking, you know, added fire, hatred. A lot of the Fizz builds struggle more so or equally so with elemental reflects because they do have so much conversion. So in pure physical builds, this is an absolute godsend. In builds with any form of conversion, you still need to be somewhat mindful of reflect, but this is a very welcome addition. 20% more damage if you've killed recently. Again, this is very easy to keep up. 20% increased radius of area skills if you've killed recently. Yeah, so Earthquake is a skill. Slayer is a class. People are going to be doing Earthquake Slayer. Even if Earthquake gets gutted, you'll be doing Reeve, you'll be doing something. This is really good. One thing which does mildly trigger me is how good Headsman is in comparison to Berserker. So Berserker is 40% more. 40 is a large number than 20, I agree. And this comes with the 10% increased damage taken. This seems quite well balanced. It seems very thematic. It sort of makes sense. The whole thing is about getting hit, just raging. And then Slayer is just about being really OP. It's good. It's really good. I would kind of like there to be somewhat more thought or somewhat more interaction, because it's basically, do I do area damage? Yeah. So I want this. Do I do fizz damage? Yeah. I want this. Do I do damage? Yeah, you want the toys at 4 damage. Also, one thing worth noting is this is really good for spellcasters. Yeah, okay, these nodes aren't amazing because, you know, attacks be 2-handed damage. But Bane of Legends is easily worth missing out on this for. Like, imagine this is a 20% cull, you would take that node. Imagine this is an onslaught, you would take that node. Imagine this is reduce reflect, you would take that node, and you still then get the more damage, increased AoE, recently tag. Like, this is really good. Again, this isn't reliant on hitting with melee, still really good. Yeah, okay, this node isn't that amazing. Reduce stun threshold is good, still works. Radius of area skills. Yeah, okay, it then has that 2-handed damage there. This you may take, but probably not. This, obviously, you're most likely not going to, but it still has got 50% increased radius. If you really need AoE, you'd maybe take these 2 points just for the 20% AoE. Possibly. You'd probably take other things, but, you know, the choice is there. So then we have 0.2% of attack damage, which is life. This will bite at elemental, physical, everything. It's tagged into 2-handed weapons, which is whatever. Endless Hunger. 20% of overkill damage is leached as life, which is pretty good. Life leech effects are not removed at full life. This is also really, really good. Now, one thing which is worth noting, and I've seen a few people mention this on Reddit, I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but I haven't seen anyone debunk it, so I'm going to assume this is true. Culling actually screws over this mechanic. Apparently, culling is an exact kill, so if you cull anything with Bane of Legends, there isn't any overkill. So, if what I'm reading is correct, and again, it's something we'll find out very quickly once this actually goes live and we can test it. If this is correct, there's some pretty negative synergy between the two of things. Yes, if you're one-shotting, like if you one-shot everything from full HP to 0, which is pretty easy with Earthquake, then this is still good. But if you're doing a build which attacks very rapidly and you're regularly culling enemies, then you're somewhat screwing yourself with your overkill damage. So I'll be very curious to see how that interaction actually works, if Reddit is correct, all of that other stuff. We then go into Brutal further. Additional max life per second to maximum life leech rate. Basically makes the leech slightly better. Increased life leech per second. Pretty good. Cannot be stunned while leeching. Cannot be stunned is a pretty good effect. It's pretty good. You are immune to bleeding while leeching. This didn't really need to be on there. Thematically, sure, it sort of works. Really powerful. As I was saying, having these sort of bleed immune things. As far as where the only unique item which exists is there's an amulet that some face record builds use, which is the you don't take fizz damage while moving thing. Rot something. So Ami, someone knows in chat what I'm talking about. So while I did say that I did want this effect on more items, it does semi-exist, so I guess I can't complain that much. It's really good. Like, Slayer is looking really powerful. Really powerful. Other things that I'll quickly go into. Guardian. Yeah, Guardian's good. It was good before. I don't need to explain that one too much. Hyro. So, this is the same, I believe. This is a lot better. It has the 50% reduced mana cost of skills, 60% reduced mana cost of skills while full energy shield. I don't know how that exactly interacts until I've actually tested it. If you can do the 0 mana cost skills, if you can do that, that's obviously pretty good. Even with just the reduced mana cost, very nice interaction, stuff like Mind Over Matter, stuff like Incinerate, just any build which has mana costs or any mana concerns, this is nice. This is unchanged as far as I'm aware. This is unchanged as far as I'm aware. If it is, it's just slightly better. And this has gotten quite a nice little 2% less damage from the 10%, which is quite significant. So once you start stacking up, you know, multiple totems, if you're using just 3, so 1 base plus this 2, that is 6% less, which has been taken off. Obviously, if you're using even more than that, you know, you're using Searing Bond totems, you're also going for Ancestral Bond. This becomes more and more powerful. Basically, it's a pretty big improvement. And as far as I'm aware, this hasn't been changed. Now, Necromancer is another one of the ones which has been quite well improved. I'm actually really happy with the Necromancer. The reason why I'm really happy with the Necromancer is Mistress of Sacrifice is a really powerful effect, and even though I respected how powerful of an effect it was during Horrendous, I never made a Necromancer build because I'm not a fan of summoners, and just all the other nodes were so heavily tied to summons that it was basically, you had Mistress of Sacrifice, aka You Are Bone Offering, which was really powerful, and everything else just felt really weak. They've done a really good job of making the other nodes not only more powerful, but also more interesting and accessible to builds with clever usage of mechanics which aren't just strictly summoners. So Spirit Eater has the minions deal 30% increased damage, so pretty good. Desecrate creates 2 additional corpses, very nice for any sort of dead builds. Generally just interesting. I'm sure there'll be some nice clever interaction with that. 40% increased damage if you have consumed a corpse recently, 2% increased attack and cast speed for each corpse consumed recently. This is really nice for Null's Inclination, anything which can self-automate offerings. It's just really solid. A Commander of Darkness, auras you cast grant 10% increased damage to you and your allies, auras you cast grant 5% increased damage to you and your allies. You and your allies have 20% all res. Again, this is really nice, just solid. This is good outside of summon builds because, you know, it's just you get increased damage, you get increased attack speed, you get a bunch of all res. Really fucking nice, really good. You and your minions have 1% additional fizz damage reduction for each zombie you own. Hasn't been changed. Beacon of Corruption increased the chaos damage. Chaos damage did receive a pretty heavy hit, but I'm sure there'll still be some people out there who go for this. Some chaos res, minion chaos res, your minions spread course of cloud of death. Pretty good. Basically, these 4 nodes here, really amazing. Really nice. Now, going into Toxic Delivery and Noxious Strike, and I'll sort of round up this incredibly long video. I only sort of planned to talk for a few minutes, but we're looking at 36, so let's wrap it up. So Noxious Strike, 30% chance to cause bleeding on hit with attacks, 40% chance to poison on hit against bleeding enemies, 50% chance to maim on hit against poison enemies, 30% increased skill effect duration if you've killed a maimed enemy recently. Spark has been hit with some interesting nerfs based on its max distance travel. Like, it's capped out now, it can't travel indefinitely based off duration. Still, having that increased skill effect duration is very nice when it comes to poison, when it comes to blade vortex and stuff like that. This is really good. Critical strike chance damage of time. Toxic Delivery, 10% reduced damage taken from damage of time. Pretty good. 20% of fizz damage gained is extra chaos damage against the enemies. That's really strong. Poison you inflict with critical strikes deal 100% more damage. Bleeding you inflict on maimed enemies deal 100% more damage. That's a lot of damage. I do worry a little bit that, as a lot of people are starting to realize, one of the big reasons we have this sort of like power creep problem or scenario, whatever you want to describe it, is because of the amount of easily accessible more multipliers. Previously, if you look back at the game's history, we really didn't have that many options when it came to getting that more damage. We mostly just started with increased damage. Maybe we would have 1 more damage, but it was basically increased damage, then 1 or 2 utility things. We're now in a day and age where, you know, every link gives more damage, and then you have this with 100% more damage. It's really good. Someone play crit puncture, you'll have fun, you'll crit really all the time because it's a shadow, and you're gonna have really juicy bleeds. Even if you're just doing, you know, something pretty cool with standard, you know, anything attacks, make use of this, it's good. You also gain access to Ambush, Assassinate, Unstable Infusion, and Deadly Infusion for just bulk standard builds, but, you know, this is just... Now, the interesting slash uninteresting slash I don't really understand what happened to Scion, and this is why I saved it for last. So, Berserker got hit pretty hard. The leech got changed to being 1% of damage leech as life if you've killed recently. Before it was just a global 1.5% life leech. This is still usable. There were Berserkers doing Berserker Explosive Arrow, and they were making do with Life Leech recently and Aspect of Carnage, and they were, you know, being able to use it reliably. You can use it semi-reliably. Yes, okay, in single target boss encounters, you won't always have this active, but it's not the end of the world. It is, however, a lot worse than it used to be. A lot worse. Now, this, added in with the fact that there have been a few other changes, means that people have sort of really gone off the Ascendant hype train. You know, the Ranger ones are all still really good. Deadeye still has skills for additional projectile. You still have some good damage in there. You still have Raider being solid. You still have Pathfinder being solid. You still have these three being solid. And then you have, you know, sort of Gimped Leech or whatever option you want to go to. I'm not going to cover every individual one. But it's one of those things of... there are still some pretty good options in here. Now, the way that Scion will work is that you'll still get to pick your 2, and then you will get to, you know, start from a new place in the tree. With the changes to Berserker and how difficult it is to actually efficiently start from a different class, I don't think we'll be seeing that many Ascendants, aka Scions, going forward. You still can make very good use of it as a CI build. Having the Witch start, because all CI builds, or nearly all CI builds, go into these amazing nodes at the start, you can easily save yourself a lot of points. Let's say you're doing some kind of like CI bow character, CI attack character, I don't know why you would, or anything which kind of wants to be in this bottom half of the tree. So you sort of come down through the proj damage, come down here, whatever, maybe pick up unwavering stance. You can then route up, start at Witch, get the good stuff, get the good AoE, come through here, grab this stuff, and save yourself a lot of travel nodes, which is really nice. Alternatively, you can do the same thing, you know, jump down through Duelist maybe to grab unwavering stance, jumping into Ranger, going for all the proj damage, jumping into the really good hybrid shadow wheels for anyone still doing Fizz Chaos damage. You know, a lot of people just come and pick up these wheels, so, you know, if you're jumping to either the side of Witch or Shadow, you're very happy because you're going to those starts anyway, and, you know, if you're somewhat intelligent with your planning, you can also utilize these bottom 3 quite well. So it still does have some use, but I find it somewhat odd that they targeted the Scion so heavily when it came to reworking the Berserker Leaf Leech, yet gave universal or near universal buffs across the board everywhere else. I am not necessarily worried, but I'm very interested to follow the game over the next 6 months. I mean, obviously I'm going to be playing this game for years to come. I'm a PvE streamer, I'm a PvE YouTuber, but I'm very interested to sort of see their like design choices going forward. The game is definitely going down a route which has been for a long time, the clear speed meta. You know, it's a thing. Some people love it, some people hate it. I've given my opinions plenty of times, but it seems very unlikely we're going to be having this grand rebalancing that some of the old school players are calling for. So if you're a fan of the current state of the game, expect that state of the game to continue. Expect, you know, levels of power creep, player strength, whatever you want to call it. Kind of expect that probably not to change. You know, new monsters are being added. There might be some really difficult mechanics being added, but it doesn't matter how much harder you make the game. Like, we already have Act 4, which is pretty tough. They could come out with Act 5, and Act 5 makes Act 4 look like, you know, normal beach. It's unlikely it's going to be, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 times difficult. It might be, or probably will be, knowing GG. It'll be, you know, more difficult. But, you know, it's the way the game is going. They seem to be happy with it, so it's something that I think we all just need to make peace with, shall we say. But anyway, I will be making another video covering my exact builds that I'm planning on wanting to go for, and, you know, covering the patch notes if and when we receive them. Obviously we'll receive them at some point, but if we get the patch notes like 10 minutes before the servers go live, then the YouTube video on that will be pretty late. As always, I'm Tarke. Sorry if I had to spend 44 minutes listening to me ramble on about 2.3 Ascendancy, but, you know, I figured some of you guys would be curious on my thoughts on it, and, you know, most people have already covered this themselves. This is mostly I'm shooting for the guys who follow me directly. Anyway, you guys are awesome. I really appreciate the sticking around, and I'm rambling again, so have a good day. Bye-bye. See you all in Prophecy.